Yes, everybody, we're still playing some Steam games over here on the channel. Today we're doing something a bit different than last time. A good game this time, instead of the dullardry that was Grizzland. You may have even heard about this game before if you keep your eye on the indie scene now that it's finally getting some good traction from other YouTube channels doing the collecting of interesting releases, and not the old commentators that focused on the trash games that were really funny and depressing at the same time. Today we're talking about Blazing Chrome, a game from the Arcade crew who, like most users who can break through Steam's deluge in any way, is still a newcomer, having put up 3 games on the platform. This, Kunai, and Dark Devotion. Blazing Chrome is a game that attempts to create a genre of the creator's childhoods, or at least a genre that no one really makes anymore. A title that ended up being pure nostalgia that's not too common when a lot of games come out with 4 or so famous classic titles labeled as inspiration. The game is a run-and-gun arcade cabinet lookalike designed to be like Contra or Metal Slug, and frankly, they definitely put the effort in at the very least. At this point, saying that's pretty redundant due to the minute of footage you've already seen on this video. Again, indie games have their own tropes, and the one that still gets the money these days is a lot of pixel art. Mostly because you can do a lot more with pixel art now than you could do back in the SNES days, in spite of projects being released that are literally 16-bit. However, pixel art these days are getting pretty intricate, and Blazing Chrome uses that amazingly well. The artistry in this game is really incredible. It's highly detailed, it has a bunch of varied locations, characters and enemies, and lots of animation to end up making it all work together, and their set-piece boss fights do push that bar as far as it'll go in this engine. It certainly makes the game stand out, which is good when they're charging $17 for it, which, if you can believe it is, kind of the high-end price for indie games on Steam. Keeping in mind that the first game that we did on this series, The Vagrant, I did buy for $4, so yeah, there is definitely a range on Steam for what is considered normal. Blazing Chrome is a retro-styled game on Steam for more than just the continued insistence on pixel art graphics. The entire game has quite the 80s feel to it. The protagonists and support characters follow the tropes of the time, with being overly violent, being delighted by destroying anything in front of them with their huge guns, along with being too cool for school in the face of insane, ridiculous odds. The weird hairstyles and clothes choices, and then there are the characters themselves, quote-unquote normal Marines with big guns, a ninja, and a cyborg get rolled in once you complete the game one time. Basically, the character stereotypes get pasted onto a slightly diverse cast, so you don't end up with a game where you just have 4 different versions of Marcus Phoenix, which is appreciated just to give the game some variety in the characters you can play. And then there's the main reason why this game is a throwback. The main enemy of the game is a cabal of murdering robots that went crazy some time ago, and that's essentially the entire premise. The world fell into apocalypse because robots turned on humans, and now it's time for them to get revenge. It's the perfectly simple setup that supports the great art design and the badass gun destruction. But what makes the game truly work wonders is that it provides the exact gameplay experience that the starving fans of these old games are looking for nowadays. Before I came to this game, I never played a Contra-like before, and there is certainly a learning curve at the start of the game if you have no experience. And there should be for a game that only has instant death to serve you. One hit does your run-in, and you have like 5 lives to work with on each run-around. Thankfully, the checkpoints are pretty frequent, so you don't bin the entire run on failure. There's just that mentality you have to wrap your brain around to enjoy this game, and thankfully for it, it's just forgiving and encouraging enough with its early challenges to hook the player into wanting to get into the grind. It's a pretty easy pitch for this game that you tell people that you die on every hit, But you do also get to do these crazy flips and fire infinite bullets at literally everything, mowing down waves and waves of enemies like a goddamn Slayer. It's all very exciting, exactly like what you want from a run-and-gun arcade game. While Blazing Chrome doesn't have a ton of variety in its scenarios, it does enough spins on the gameplay formula to flesh out the entire run. There are different perspective shooting sections that are pretty Star Fox-like and fun to run through. It does slow the game down quite a bit, but getting to play an entirely different sort of game for a bit does make a good distraction to keep my attention going. And then there are only a few different guns in the game. You get a Spartan laser, a short-range cutting sort of weapon, a laser whip, and a bigger spread gun, along with some buffs to pick up like higher jumping, a shield to help you out, and a speed boost. That's pretty much the only pickups that this game has to offer. And then following that are the vehicle sections. A couple of times you get to operate a motorcycle and a mech suit. The mech suit is a cool power fantasy where you get some high-powered guns to just slash through hordes like they're butter, but they're also kind of slow, and the challenge in these sections is just surviving to the end, which is a bit meh. But the motorcycling sections kick up those lost notches and make up for some true harrowing gameplay bits. They go for the split-second design, where you have to react to track changes and obstacles before you really see them, along with a crushing number of enemies all going without getting hit. A long run through required perfection that makes for the edge-of-seat combination of paranoia and excitement to really liven up the start of a level. It can be kind of annoying also because the window for failure is literally a half second, if that. Like, you have to know what's coming for you and how to hit the safe zones before you really see them coming, which is why it is so exciting, because any second you could be done in, and it's exactly kind of like how this works, especially because of the very generous live system that this game has to keep you going. This game might not have everything in it, but it certainly has the right amount of variety to keep a player glued to their seat, with all these sections not only being completely different to each other to liven things up in general, but also they maintain that sort of challenge rating that actually keeps you engaged in the game, because you get enough lives to push through really anything in this game. So you just have to keep throwing your head at the wall until you break through. And the gameplay itself is just fun enough to, again, just keep you invested in playing the game. The boss fights are just fantastic across the board. Everything about most of them is right on the money. They have intimidating character designs, they have a repeating attack repertoire that is easy to memorize but also difficult to dodge, especially when they get into their rage form at the end of the fight and they start mixing things up. It has the right amount of challenge, and they have the spectacular arenas and backgrounds. One of the best was the jet mech in the second level with its lightning attacks that hit basically the golden standard for boss design. It's perfectly balanced, and I loved it even though it was kicking my teeth in a few attempts. The only real dip was the boss at the end of the Body Horror Factory, where it was about being killed really, really fast, instead of being a challenging encounter in any way, because it was just hitting you constantly and just being a constant problem. It was just a really weird attack pattern that could trip you up in pretty unfair ways, especially when it got to the second half and it was just a whole different brand of annoyance. The final battle is a bit of a slog, and they could have used a mid-fight checkpoint or something, but overall it wasn't that bad. I just kind of wish that if you're gonna go for a boss fight that has this many phases in it, you probably should put more save points in the middle of the fight, especially when, again, any hit can just do you in and then you have to repeat the whole thing over again. I guess the unfortunate news about Blazing Chrome is that, like we've said already, is designed exactly like this past genre of arcade game. So what you are getting for the high indie price ends up actually being pretty short. There are 6 levels in the game, and that's it. It's the classic beat-em-up standard, which I really can't blame them for. I just have to tell you that because it's kind of what you have to expect when you pick up this game for the 20 bucks. It's all a part of the vision that they had when making this game, and I suppose the reason why the game is so short was because they condensed all the quality ideas they had going for it into such a small amount of game time. I think I finished my blind run in about 5 hours, so like a bunch of other high quality indies, the game is depressingly short. Which again, just falls into the thing that they were planning to make in the first place. Is not really a detriment because there is some replay value to it, especially if you want to bring in some Steam friends to do a co-op, which is definitely an option. But again, if you're interested in this game, you gotta know what you're buying. And what you're buying is basically going to be an afternoon's worth of game time unless you want to play it 2 or 3 times. At the end of this piece, like I said before, I am no Contra player. I have no experience with this sort of thing. I've never had a real interest in it before, but considering all those things, that I've never played one of these sorts of games back in the day, I still fucking loved it. Blazing Chrome is exactly the sort of game that people will look for when they want to praise the indie market. It's imaginative, it's creative, it plays extremely well, and even though it's a Contra one-hit death at all times game, it is incredibly generous with your lives. You do only get 5 lives per run, but you have infinite continues, which just keeps you going. And it makes up for the fact that live systems in general are completely bullshit nowadays, because games aren't designed to be arcade games anymore and they don't have to constantly peg you for money. So, what do? You just make infinite continues, and that makes up for the entire annoyance that goes with the live system. It's the sort of game that others will hold up when AAA companies start annoying people again into making games that only satisfy the company rather than the people who are starving for niche games like this that aren't getting made anymore. It's the stuff that I wanted to point out as a part of this series to tell people that indie games do come out constantly, and if you pay attention, then you can pick out gems like Blazing Chrome. The indie market is not dry because it isn't hitting the mainstream news, you just haven't seen it before. Blazing Chrome might be a bit pricey on the market for a 5-hour experience, yet I'm gonna tell you that it's completely worthwhile, especially with the replay value, that you can just bring friends in to have a look at this crazy Blazing Chrome thing. Blazing Chrome is right on the money for a quality indie game, and I am just glad to hear that it did well enough to hit a console release and to get some attention from people who actually pay attention to the indie market. I want to personally thank you, Arcade Crew, for making my week. Now, go make me a Souls-like or something, maybe a Crazy Taxi clone. I'm sure it'll be great, whatever your next project ends up being.